Welcome back. My name is Henrik Palmgren. It's good to have you all with us today. Thank you for listening. Dennis McKenna is an ethnopharmacologist, author, and brother to well-known psychedelics proponent Terrence McKenna. He joins us today to discuss his new book project called The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss, and that is going to be about Dennis and Terrence's work. Stay with us for an interesting conversation about humanity, the influence of psychedelics, our past, and where we are heading. It's good to have you with us on Red Eyes Radio, Dennis. Thank you for coming on the program. It's a pleasure to talk to you, and thank you obviously for your time here today. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for inviting me. I'm very pleased. I'm very pleased to be here.
Excellent. We have a lot to talk about, and we have an hour here with you today, Dennis, and we're going to get into some of the projects here that you are currently working on, specifically related to, I guess the working name for now is The Brotherhood of the Screaming Abyss. And why don't you, at the outset here, tell our listeners a little bit about this new book project that you're currently working on, Dennis?
Okay, well, this is going to be a memoir, basically. I think that, now the time is right to write this story. There's a great deal of expectation, not to say hysteria, around 2012. So there's a great anticipation of 2012, and I think in the culture, a sort of awareness that we live in a time of accelerating change. And Terrence, and to a certain degree myself, but really Terrence deserves the credit for being way out in front of a lot of people on this sort of millenarian expectation around 2012. Whether he's right or wrong about that, he certainly has identified a cultural theme that's becoming more and more common. So I thought it was a good time to come out with this. On the cultural level, it's good. The way the book is scheduled, it will come out in September of 2012, which is a good time for it. If the world's going to end, you'll have time to read it. And if the world isn't going to end, you can finish it and give it away for Christmas, right?
That's perfect. It's a great plan, actually. Yeah.
It's perfect. And so that is the projected rollout date. And so in that sense, it makes sense to do the book now, before 2012. From a personal point of view, it makes sense for me because I just turned 60 in last December. And at that age, you start thinking about thresholds and transitions, and in some ways 60 separates the earlier part of your life from whatever is left of it in a fairly definitive way, even more I think than crossing over into 50. And so I'm at that stage, and I have never had a chance to really tell this tale from my perspective, which is different than Terrence's, obviously. And so now's the time. And, I decided to set up this Kickstarter site on the advice of one of Terrence's old agents. I had thought about trying to find a publisher and go the conventional route, which I think I could probably do. But he suggested this alternative, and that seemed attractive to me. So I decided to do this, and judging by the response so far, it's been a good idea. People seem to resonate with this idea.
Absolutely. We will. I definitely want to ask you a little bit more for those who don't know what Kickstarter is and what that means, Dennis. But I want to ask you, I guess, first here in terms of TimeWave Zero, the software, and 2012 and all of this. What was that your main, how should we put it, incentive for kicking off this project, or was there something else you felt that is necessary and important to tell in terms of the work that both you and Terrence did throughout the years together?
Well, yeah, it's partly motivated by 2012 and the desire to get something out before 2012 comes. I mean, I personally am rather skeptical that the world's going to end on December 21st, 2012. So, but you never know. So it might be good to get something out. Partly it's a personal thing. The time has come. Partly it's, Terrence has been gone since 2000. And so many of the transformative events that have shaped the last decade, he didn't see. He did not live to see. But on the other hand, I think he'd be totally comfortable, sitting around talking with us about this, because basically what he suggested was that, there was going to be a time of tremendous upheaval and changes like we never anticipated. And all that's happened, I mean, the 9/11 and the tsunami in Japan and the earthquakes and the various, wars, the breakout of whatever it is in the Mideast, political unrest, certainly, if not longing for democracy. I mean, I think that, if you, I mean, what Terrence tried to do in a way with the time wave, not entirely successfully, in my opinion, but the idea was correct. The idea to try to quantify or put a mathematical model onto the ingression of novelty into our world. And, it was a good try. And in some degree, it might be said that it works. This goes back really to notions of Alfred North Whitehead's philosophy, the idea that novelty is something that ingresses into the continuum. There really is something new under the sun every day. The question is, does it, we seem to be in a time of accelerating change.
Right.
I think subjectively we all have that feeling. So in some ways, the novelty theory, the time wave, was a way to, in some ways, get a handle on that, put a framework around it. Whether or not it was totally correct in all its details, which I don't think it was, but it gave people a sense of sort of a tool with which to grapple with, if you will, this accelerating change, much in the same way that astrology or the I Ching or these kinds of things, they may not be scientific, but within their own terms, they're valid. They carry a certain subjective validity. You may not be able to, prove them as a theory, but they give people a feeling, some way of, they're a useful, I guess, cognitive tool for understanding what's happening to us.
That's right, and so many things are unfolding incredibly quickly, and this is the basic premise of the idea, as far as I've understood it as well. New things coming in, basically, change as well. The question, obviously, though, is if this is what you and if what you believe Terrence was anticipating as well. We have seen a tremendous, obviously, technological, kind of revolution, I guess we can say in one sense, in terms of the booming of the internet and so forth as well. But is there any area, I guess, that you personally feel that it's kind of has stagnated a bit? It hasn't accelerated as quickly as you has anticipated, Dennis?
Well, yeah. I mean, I'm in many areas of technology. I think in cultural change and kind of change in global consciousness do seem to be accelerating, and they are going to profoundly influence the world that we're evolving into. As always, the institutions that don't seem to be able to respond to this in any way that's other than the negative are politics and religions. And I would have to say that these two institutions, which are very often very tightly intertwined, they are the major forces that are trying to stem the tide of change. They're very invested in the status quo. And it's a zero-sum game because the status quo is being swept away, and it's being swept away by forces that, are inevitable and that are not really being recognized for what they are by the institutions and people that want to resist it.
Yeah.
I mean, there are, it's hard to maintain an ideology or a worldview that's based on 14th century understandings of the way the world is.
Yeah.
I mean, we know the world isn't flat, but some of those same notions are still, very sort of current in religious ideologies. And politicians and politics in general, and the ability of governments to respond to people's needs is, in this day and age, even more pathetic than it's always been. And I think that technology and cultural change and artistic change and to some degree, psychedelics play a role here. They are changing people's consciousness on a mass scale. Politics is almost irrelevant, and the stupider and more ideologically rigid politicians become, the less relevant it gets. Most people just ignore it because there's really nothing there.
That's right. I would agree with that, and it's an obvious,
it has the ability to impact our lives in really profound ways.
Sure.
Especially if and we do need smart people running things, and we see almost in politics these days a knee-jerk reaction against that. It's almost as though stupidity is enshrined as the norm of the day. And that's distressing.
Indeed it is. And it's an obvious fact how closely related the time wave zero idea or the novelty theory is to obviously the Mayan calendar. And as far as I've understood it, then this was developed separately, if you will, to, the Terrence and you didn't know about the Mayan calendar as such by the time you were developing it. Which it's a really interesting thing, and obviously if we do tie the Mayan calendar into it, we understand certain interpretations anyway of the Mayan calendar seems to suggest that we're talking about collapse and a fall of certain structures, and if nothing else, we can certainly see it, as you mentioned, Terrence, both in the political but also in the economic system right now. So we're back to that idea that all these things that are unfolding and happening obviously necessarily don't mean, at least in the outset, something good. Maybe at the end it will be something good because of the effects, that will happen consequently, meaning the economic system crashes and collapses, and hopefully something better, if you will rise out of those ashes. But maybe you can talk a little bit about the comparison there in terms of the Mayan calendar, and also what you see is happening with a lot of the structures in the world, economics and government, Dennis.
Well, I think, the time wave was developed independently of the Mayan calendar, and it was only later in sort of the revision and refinement of the idea that we became aware of the Mayan calendar. And the time wave was more Terrence's bailiwick than mine. But the time wave, from the time of its conception to now, has undergone some transformations, in the sense that there has been an ongoing effort to identify what is the end point, because the whole thing depends on where you set the end point, and then you run that from that point back against the known historical record, and you look for these correlations or these resonances, right? So if you don't have the endpoint set correctly, you can be off. Of course, we're talking about a scale that on some levels is billions of years. So,
yeah,
but it can be off. So I think Terrence eventually settled on an endpoint that was in 2012, that was close to the Mayan end date, that was different from it than by 2 or 3 months. and basically found out about the end of the Mayan calendar and kind of made an executive decision that, well, it's not that far off, so let's go with that.
Right, it's basically the same idea that